Hello, my name is Rocco Strangio, and I'm the host of the Law, AI, and Money podcast. I bring on attorneys, engineers, and entrepreneurs to unravel the world of AI and to discuss how it'll affect the legal profession. Today, I'm joined with Pablo Tapia, corporate counsel at Microsoft. Pablo has a background in computer science and patent law. Pablo started his career as a software engineer at Motorola, and after obtaining his law degree, he made the jump to Greenberg Traurig as a patent attorney. Almost 2 decades ago, Pablo joined the team at Microsoft and later became an in-house legal counsel. Now, as a result of Microsoft's innovations in artificial intelligence, Pablo's work primarily centers around AI implementation and regulation. As an emerging expert in AI development and regulation, it's a privilege to have Pablo on. With so few experts in the space, his insights are invaluable. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Hey, Pablo.
Hey, Rocco. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing good. Yeah. It's nice to talk to you again. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule to come on, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I want to start with regulation. For a long time, there's been this notion that there's a vacuum in terms of explicit AI rules. Is that a mistaken belief? Are there rules already in place that touch on AI, or are individuals correct in saying that there's no explicit AI rules just yet?
Yeah, that's absolutely. So I would say the majority of the new Gen AI use cases are pieces of technology that have already been covered by existing laws, right? Things like privacy, competition, um, laws around security. Those have been around for a long time, and they apply to new areas of technology like AI. Now, you got to think about, of course, this is a new technology. It presents new use cases that are being addressed more explicitly now with new laws. You have the EU AI Act, for example. It's a very comprehensive set of regulations around what it means to deploy an AI system or to use an AI system. But traditionally, you can think of, again, things like GDPR that will continue to be in effect. And for companies like Microsoft, it's something that we've been building our practice in being able to comply with those regulations, and that continues to apply to AI as well.
Yeah. So there may not be explicit AI rules. I'll go back to the EU AI Act after this question, but without explicit rules, can you explain how Microsoft has self-regulated itself through the concept of responsible AI?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, look, I think at a baseline, Microsoft and just in general, the tech industry has been doing machine learning, some form of AI for the past few decades, really. When you have systems like recommender systems giving you suggestions about a song, or even text completion of or predictive texting when you're texting and using SMS, or analytics. All of these systems have been already in place, and when you're looking at now the advent of AI, of course, you have to look at what are the new use cases. But from the Microsoft perspective, we've started looking at responsible AI back in 2016. I think it was Satya Nadella that came up with a blog talking about the notion of using AI responsibly. Microsoft then published a set of principles at, for the as part of our responsible AI journey. These are 6 principles that we have for the responsible AI use. Those are fairness, accountability, transparency, inclusiveness, privacy and security, and of course, reliability and safety for the system. And, just going into each of those a little bit, those were the kind of like, that's the bedrock of how we are using and we're thinking about AI in terms of our self-regulation. The regulation isn't, some of the regulation that's coming out now is very much something that we've been following, but you got to think about, as a company that is putting technology out there at the forefront, we have to think about how do we address these issues that might be coming down the line. So, for example, for fairness, we think about, how do you allocate opportunities to people, or opportunities to resources or information that are fair to everybody who participates in it, right? And avoiding amplifying societal biases, things like that. And same with accountability, making sure that there's human oversight, that people know.
I mean, transparency would be that open source coding for most of these innovations.
I think transparency can take some of that, the idea of making sure that people, they want to know that an AI system is involved, for example. There's also the notion of wanting to know what the algorithm is actually doing. But more than anything, people want to understand, one thing is to put out an algorithm that, people may not necessarily understand exactly what it's doing, but a better description of that would be to delineate what the capabilities are of the system, what the limitations are of that system, how it could be potentially misused. So that's part of the transparency aspect, of course. And of course, there's also inclusiveness, to make sure that people of all walks of life have access to this technology, that including people of all abilities. What does it mean? What does it mean for a person who's blind to be able to now use AI and get an insight into the world that they didn't have before?
Wow, that's very interesting, and it's clear from that despite over the past few years this lack of explicit AI rules, Microsoft and many other large tech companies have been self-regulating. And even on top of that, there's laws in place that have been in place for many years now that still touch on AI despite not explicitly mentioning AI in their codes. But in recent years, we have seen some mobility, both domestically and abroad. And so I want to go back to the EU AI Act. What's your stance on that? Is it very encompassing? Do we still need more AI rules, maybe that the EU AI Act doesn't touch on? And is it binding for US tech companies?
Right. So I would say, for one, if you're a company that's, I think that it is operating in Europe, of course, you're going to be subject to those laws, or that you're going to providing services to European users. And, as Microsoft is, the first company putting out technology out there, of course, we have an obligation to make sure that we have the responsibility to design systems that are compliant. And more specifically about the EU AI Act, I think it's a really good framework. Frankly, I think it's it breaks down what the AI based on like levels of risk. So there are three specific risks, right? One is the unacceptable risk, prohibited practices type of risks, things like social scoring, for example, or predictive policing. Those are acts that you just simply cannot use AI applications for. And there's the second tier of that, which is more the high risk AI systems, but that can be used, but they are subject to strict obligations because they are things like, for example, safety mechanisms, or other, like medical devices is one of them, autonomous driving, critical infrastructure are the ones that are highlighted in the act. And then, of course, there's the third tier, which is more like limited risk and more acceptable risk for users. So it is really meant to protect end users when it comes to the use of AI and putting technology out there.
Yeah. I read, and this was a little bit ago, that today we have a coalition for secure AI, the likes of which includes um, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and NVIDIA, among others. Do you know what the goal of this coalition is and how closely Microsoft is working with other large tech companies to maybe hash out AI rules and guidelines?
I don't work closely with that aspect, but I'll say that, across industry, these conversations along the lines of safety are crucial to have, because not just through players in industry, but also with government, academia, and just civil society at large, of how do we design these systems in a way that are safe. And and you have to have these cross group conversations, because you can't isolate yourself and operate in a vacuum. So I'm definitely not surprised that Microsoft has adopted and participated in some of these consortia.
Yeah, yeah. Going to the AI products that Microsoft offers, I want to first talk about an underappreciated um, um, notion that, you know, people don't really compartmentalize consumer services and enterprise services, despite the difference between the two and the difference that AI is implemented between the two. Could you explain what the differences are and how AI rules might differ between consumer and enterprise services?
Sure. So, I mean, I think more than anything, you can think about, the free services that you might get from various cloud service providers, or just general services that you get online, um,
Mhm.
that you can access for free, and use all the technology there. I think there's so much now innovation around the area of AI, that every technology vendor has a sort of like a free offer. But then there is a second tier, usually like a pro version or some sort of like upgrade, where you pay a subscription, a monthly subscription usually, um, and and those use cases are typically more used by businesses, by organizations. So you also see, for example, I don't know, like some for business type of t- um, service. And when it comes to end users and individuals, the regulations might vary. Things like, for example, consumer protection might be more important in those scenarios. Whereas if you're looking at a more business focused or enterprise focused type of service, the the focus is more on making sure that the what we do, as for example in the sense of, in terms of our services for Microsoft, we create our services to make sure that we only handle your data at your instructions, for example, or that there might be specific regulations to enterprises or to employers that apply, and how does the service provider facilitate uh, the compliance with those regulations. So there's a distinct difference between the two in many areas, but it obviously depends also on the specific use case.
I see that a lot because, the price you pay for these applications determines greatly how the companies offering those tools can leverage whatever information you're using. I think a big concern right now is that there's random companies, random websites offering ChatGPT type services, generative AI services, but there's no protections in place. Obviously, when you work with Microsoft, there's protections in place to protect this data. Whereas if you go on a random website and use what is basically a plugin of
Right.
ChatGPT, um, your data might not be as protected if you're working with some of these big tech companies. So that's a big
That's
concern.
something that
But
I'll, when you use, and I'll speak for, for Microsoft in terms of the services that we
yeah,
provide, um, that there is specific security and privacy measures that we've taken to make sure that the data of the customer, the enterprise customer, is really well protected. That it's not shared outside of your specific space on the online of your tenancy.
mhm.
That it doesn't leave that boundary, which is what we call it, unless you tell us to do so or with your permission. And that's an important distinction because I think you know businesses, when now they're trying to adopt AI and they're trying to figure out how can I bring AI into my organization or my business, they're worried about or at least concerned in making sure that their data is protected. So that's that's something that it's front and center for us to make sure that customers feel comfortable and confident to be able to deploy AI systems for themselves.
Mhm. For sure. Um, I want to go into. I want to stay on this topic of making AI safe. In my opinion, we're on the verge of a content boom. We're decentralizing a lot of the ways that individuals can create content through these AI tools. So nowadays, maybe before you needed a lot of resources, some labor involved to create some content. Now you just need your imagination, the right application, the right AI tool, and you can create pretty much anything.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um, and so we're getting a lot of content. Um, we're having a lot of individuals play with these tools. Are there innovations that Microsoft or other tech companies are making to make sure that the content created through these applications is safe and not being used for malice?
No, that's a really good question and a really important one. I mean, going back to that safety topic, right? If you think about, the it, it, the notion of accountability and human oversight uh, and the human being responsible for the AI generation, um, we also have to make sure that there are some technical mitigations put in place. So in terms of things that Microsoft does, for example, as part of our you know development cycle, we want to make sure that we have the right transparency notes uh, put out there. Internally, we have something that we call like an impact assessment mechanism, and we've shared these forms out there where the impact assessment is something that engineers use for any new feature, and then they identify there who are the stakeholders for that particular AI system, what are the benefits that the AI system will provide, as well as some of the limitations that it may have, and then what are the mitigations that we're putting in place. And so going to the mitigation aspect is, like you can place in the system itself safety meta prompts that can help with things like harmful content or copyright issues or jailbreaks. And these tools are available also today as APIs. So Microsoft has a full stack of not just models that Microsoft puts together and has in a catalog, LLM models, for example, the Azure OpenAI model, but also Llama and other models that are part of the catalog that you can use as part of your Azure subscription. And then on top of that, we have APIs that are specific to um, content filtering. These are tools that
Hmm.
people can, as a developer of AI systems, you can use to your advantage, and not have to reinvent the wheel, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how many new ideas come about from all these very powerful applications. I wanted to stay on content creation. How is Microsoft supporting content creation through its copyright commitment? Is it protecting customers from third-party IP claims?
Yeah, no, that's so. I think that's another aspect of, right now, when as an enterprise customers, you have a subscription. One of the things that we say is, if you use a Microsoft generative AI feature, the content that comes out of that is something that you can have the necessary confidence to use, because if you face a type of third party claim against you, Microsoft will defend you in those particular uh, lawsuits, and
Wow.
so it's just to instill more level of confidence to be able to use AI in your business, because otherwise, I think we recognize that there is a level of uncertainty, and people want to make sure that they can use these tools um, with confidence. And so that's part of the Microsoft commitment. Of course, you know, we do have some filtering, as I said, to make sure that the output of the system is not um, putting out things that are, that we know that could be um, infringing copyright. So those filters remove those. Um, and and so long as you're not putting, say, for example, like as your input an entire book, and I ask questions, of course there's going to be, a derivative work out of that. What is the copyright implication
Yeah.
there? Um, but so long as you're using it in a way that you're asking the model questions, or you're asking the model for generation of images, we will protect, and we will provide that level of defense, and that's what we call the copyright commitment.
Well, with your background in IP, you're probably better than anybody um, to talk about how with these tools, every new layer that you add on is protected copyright. Is that correct? Whether it's a new idea, a new application, it's not that easy for you to infringe on somebody's copyright because any new unique idea, even on top of something already existing, is protected. Is that correct?
Sort of. I mean, it has to be not. I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, right? If you're looking at patents, it has to be novel. If there has, it can be a prior art that reads on your invention, for example. So it's true that a lot of innovation happens from prior innovation, and those are improvements on top of innovation. But um, to receive patent protection, you have to have one of them. The requirements is novelty, right? Section 101. There's non-obviousness as well.
Mm.
So that's on the patent side, and then on the copyright side, again, there has to be some level of authorship, um, and if you're deriving, derivative works is something that is also a right that is attributed to the original author of a particular work. But then, there are a lot of nuances, nuances around fair use, or how distinct and transformative the work is to the point that you can get copyright
Mhm.
protection on that work. So um, copyright law will continue to evolve. I think if with the advent of AI, I think we'll have to
For sure.
figure exactly where that fair use line is, for example, um, and to your point, copyright protection will be there for things that are works of that are original.
Yeah. 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 Much in the same way that an AI system might be influenced by prior works and use those prior works as insight into new creations. I mean, our brains do the same exact thing. We in all the new content that we create, there's some sort of influence that pushed us to create that content from a
Right.
prior work. Movies is the best example. You have movies that always uh, rework something that had happened, you know, 50 years ago in a movie, a popular movie, and it depends on what's in the public domain, obviously. But I think it's interesting for people to point the finger at AI very quickly. You know, it's stealing my data and reworking it to create something new, but that's pretty much what humans do every day.
I think so in some ways. I think that when you use AI as a way to create something new, I think as a point of recommendation, I would say, like at least the way that I look at it is, AI is a tool,
Yeah.
and I have my own new original ideas that I think about, and that I can use AI to help me maybe form those ideas better, or to expand on them. But I think the human input is crucial here as well. If I think sometimes we see these. I just saw recently it was a picture of a
Yeah.
birthday cake in the middle of the forest, and it was a giant birthday cake, right? And then somebody had to kind of like come up with that specific prompt in their head, and think about what that would look like, and then ask the AI. So you know, don't forget. Let's not forget that there's always a human component, and AI is just a tool.
Yeah. 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 No, I totally agree. I think it's going to reshape how we view copyright, though, for sure. Because we're going to be creating content at an unbelievable rate, something that we've never even touched on before. And we thought we did that with the internet already, but there's going to be a real boom for content creation, and it has to just rework copyright, or else there's going to be just claims everywhere, in my opinion. But I want to go to data, because data is one of the um, most sensitive topics when it comes to AI. How is an organization's data protected when it's using generative AI services offered by Microsoft, let's say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, one of the things that we say is that going back to the point of pre AI, we've already had some existing commitments to enterprise customers to say, hey, your data is protected under the same privacy and security measures that we've put in place. And that includes, for example, prompts and responses that come out of the model. And none of those things, if you use our generative AI services, are shared with any third parties. And we don't actually even train our foundational models without your permission to with to use your data. So um, your data remains in your control, and it's based on your permissions that we would use any data in a specific way. And the existing data access controls will still continue to apply. And in addition to that, there's also this notion of sensitivity labels in, like products like Word and others like Microsoft, where those sensitivity labels will also be respected by AI. So it's super important. And the lastly, the other aspect is, of course, that when you some people ask, hey, are you sharing these prompts, are you sharing these data externally? And our answer is definitely not. Again, it has to be done based on your customer instruction.
How do individuals consent for data to be used by companies like Microsoft?
So you
Can customers consent to that?
a particular customer, if they're using, depends on the level of subscription that they might have. There might be different commitments that we provide to those customers versus, for example, an end user. Um, if you're a subscriber, we might provide more level of protection, um, in or rather, it's the same level of protection, but we might have, say, for example, additional commitments to you in terms of audits and security if you're an enterprise customer. So it really depends on, are you using the data? Are you using the service as a subscription or as a free
Yeah.
service?
Yeah. Yeah. Like with anything, I mean, I think most other companies have the same guidelines, but I wanted to talk about agency. This is sort of the last topic I want to touch on. In agency law, um, those are the rules that govern whether principal and agents can be liable within the scope of an agent's actions, within the scope of the principal agent relationship. Do you think we'll ever view AI assistants, AI tools as agents subject to this relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think an agent is somebody who has authority to act on behalf of the principal, right?
Yeah.
But that usually refers to an individual person. And if we are talking about personhood for AI, I think that's a bit more out there. For in my perspective, I don't think we should necessarily get there. I think the human person should remain accountable. That's actually part of our principles as well on accountability, both of human oversight and accountability for whatever actions the AI system takes. Sure, there will be some things that are automations that we put in place, that we're trying to use AI in a way that will help us um, create more efficiencies. But that doesn't mean that if you use a tool, then you can say, oh, well, the tool did it. Versus you have to have your own due diligence and understand how the tool is working, and then ultimately taking responsibility for that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned humans. Just a few years ago, when we had the sort of AI boom in mainstream media, around the time where ChatGPT exploded, um, AI applications actually passed the Turing test, which is a test that measures whether a computer has human-like qualities. And maybe you can explain it better for our viewers. But doesn't that mean that AI sort of has the same capabilities that humans have and should be subject to the same accountability?
Again, I think if you think about even an autonomous vehicle, right? It's self-driving.
Yeah.
It takes you. It
Exactly.
it performs arguably the same, or in some, according to some reports and analytics, uh, even better than human drivers. Um, but that doesn't mean that the responsibility now lies on the self-driving car if something happens. There has to be some accountability on the human person, at least in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it depends. It depends what sort of relationship is agreed upon, I guess. If we have an agreement in place for, let's say, a company like Tesla um, agrees that yes, we're acting as an agent for the passengers in that car, then I don't see why the AI autonomous vehicle wouldn't be liable in case of an incident. case of a crash, let's say.
Yeah, I'm not that close to those
So that
laws, but
remains to be seen
I
because
mean, you would think that if anything goes wrong, it would go, back to the car manufacturer, um, that put the system in place, and of course, subject to whatever controls that the specific user set in motion. But I think from what I've seen, I think there's some pretty good safety mechanisms, that have been instituted. I think you even with prior technology, when cars were starting to be a thing, there were lots of regulations around seat belts and airbags, and I think cars are a lot more safe now, and that's the type of regulation that car manufacturers should be subject to. And with this new technology, I don't think that there is any difference in terms of, yeah, you have to have a level of responsibility for the manufacturer in that particular case.
well, human input too. It's interesting because we're very close, almost on the brink. Tesla is about to unveil full self-driving cars, and up to this point, most of the cases that arose in regards to, let's say, autonomous vehicle crashes were mostly put on and the people in those cars, the passengers in those cars, were mostly held accountable for those crashes as a result of them, let's say, not having their hand on the steering wheel. Like, one of the requirements is you have to be, always aware. Despite the car driving itself, you have to be vigilant and ready to take the wheel whenever. And there was individuals falling asleep, let's say.
Oh yeah, no,
So
I
it's
agree.
interesting.
I mean, it is a shared responsibility in that sense, in that particular case, right?
Yeah. Depends how much we innovate these systems. If they get totally self-driving and it becomes the norm to just sleep in the car or take meetings in a car. So I guess, yeah, it remains to be seen where we head in terms of the principal agent relationship between these tech manufacturers and people. Like, if Tesla, which they have now done, unveil a full self-driving car, which I've come to believe involves the front two passenger seats actually spinning and rotating to make a meeting room with the four seats of the car, I would assume that there's no accountability for the driver to remain vigilant and have their hands on the wheel. That seems like we're putting our hands fully into the trust of these autonomous vehicles. So it remains to be seen. I guess it depends how much we actually innovate. Because this whole argument started when ChatGPT passed that threshold. But I wanted to go into my last question. This may be forever a sci-fi fantasy, and maybe I already know how you might answer on this, but do you think it's possible for AI to ever become sentient? And if so, how close do you think we are to AGI?
Yeah, I think that's a question on everybody's mind. Frankly, I think some people think it's around the corner, a couple of years from down the road. Others think it's going to be 10 years, 50 years. I think there is a pretty good indication that at some point we will get there, um, as
Oh,
as humans, as the technology continues to evolve. Whether it will be fully a conscious being, because personally, I think the question of consciousness is it's an interesting one, and one that I think it doesn't really apply. Like, we have intelligence in biology, and now we're talking about intelligence in silicon, and none of us know. But I don't know that it would be exactly that, like in the same shape that consciousness is expressed in the human mind. It'll probably be something different, something similar. It might feel like you're interacting with another human being, um, but who knows if it'll ever reach the same type of interaction or type of awareness that a human being has.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way they think, I think this is unquestionable. The way they think, humans and these AI applications, they kind of mimic each other with the neural pathways and these nodes in AI tools. And I guess it's just a philosophical question between whether, you know, we view them as being self-aware. I guess for me, consciousness is self-awareness and free will. Um, but maybe it remains to be seen whether that is true, and or maybe that's just our human bias attributing certain self-awareness to us. But like you said, it remains to be seen. We have plenty of years, I imagine, before we get to this threshold. But it's always
Yeah,
interesting
I
to
think, and then the other layer there, of course, it's human emotion, right? We are biological beings that are not just governed by certain processes, neurological processes, synapses happening in our brain, but you can think about, how our behavior, how our nervous system also gets affected by different chemicals that our our bodies are programmed to use to and then emotion is something that is very specific to the human experience, potentially to other animals as well, but in my mind is very subject to things like uh, adrenal glands and thyroids, and none of these things exist in
yeah.
silicon, and maybe one day we will design that. I mean, that's like,
We'll design a central nervous system for an AI application to exhibit fear and
yeah, hopefully. I
desire.
mean, hopefully not. I think that's where the line should be. Honestly, I think that's where we should. I mean, personally, now I know we've been talking a bit about Microsoft, but this is absolutely not a Microsoft view. It's my own personal view. I think that
Yeah.
the 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 attribution of human emotion to an AI system, or even the pushing the envelope in that direction seems a very unknown and dangerous path. So I hope we don't get there.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's the first time somebody's expressed it as, the lack of a certain central nervous system and the emotions that humans exhibit from that. So that's really interesting. I think that is the distinction. And, these AI applications are just a
One of them, right?
but they
I mean,
lack
like I have a 3-year-old, and the I think some of the things that I've been reading about the oxytocin that your body produces by being close to your child or playing with them, and
yeah.
how are you going to replicate with an AI system, right? And then the behavior that comes out of that, and then the beliefs that we create in our minds out of those experiences, or in some unfortunate other cases, some potentially negative behaviors as well, which I think that hard to replicate for an AI silicon based intelligence.
Yeah. Well, Pablo, I know a lot of the thoughts and opinions that you expressed in this conversation are by no means meant to be representative of Microsoft, but nonetheless, you are someone who works and has been working for a long time at Microsoft. And so, and with your background in computer science, IP, um, I view your insights very, very highly. And so it's been a privilege to have you on. I'm very appreciative that you took the time to come on, and I hope we talk very.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Rocco.
Hey, thanks for tuning into the Law, AI, and Money podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure to like and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. Thank you.